Hello and welcome. My name is Kela Hines. Today I will be reviewing Chapter 11 of How English Works, written by Anne Curzon and Michael Adams. This chapter focuses entirely on language variation. So, today we will be going over a few important topics for the chapter. We'll start by reviewing some important key terms and vocabulary. We'll then examine some samples from the text that are critical in understanding the context of the chapter. We'll then talk about how we can use language variation in the ELA classroom, and then we'll review the chapter as a whole and review some references used in the presentation. So, let's get started. So, here are some very important vocabulary and key terms for the chapter. First, we have dialect. Dialect is a variety of language spoken by a group of people that is systematically different from other variations of the language in terms of either structural or lexical features. When we think of dialect, it's easy to understand it by thinking about the sound of language. As somebody from Alabama, the way we sound in Alabama is entirely different than the people here in Georgia. So moving here in 2009 was a huge culture shock when I realized that not everybody sounded like me. Secondly, we have sociolinguistics. Sociolinguistics is an examination of language usage in social context. It's how our social lives have an impact on how and what we speak. We then have linguistic markets, which is simply where linguistic exchanges happens. This can be like physical locations. For example, a linguistic market could be the schoolhouse where you work and teach, or a linguistic market can be you at home with your family. All right, because whether you're at work or whether you're at home, there's some sort of linguistic exchanges happen because you're having conversations. We then have social network theory. So this is a theory that focuses on the networks of relationships that govern one speaker's regular interactions with other. So this is not about social media or anything like that. It's all about the literal social networks that you create and communicate with on a daily basis. And then lastly, we have code switching. Code switching is alternating between two or more codes. This can be in the same conversation or not, using distinctively different dialects or language. This concept originated with multilingual speakers. However, anybody has the ability to code switch, and it's something that is it happens every single day in some shape or form. So now we will look at some important samples from the text that are important to helping you understand the context of language variation. So our first quote is non-standard varieties are linguistically equal to standard varieties at the structural and communicative level. So while standard American English is the basis of what we teach and what we're taught in school, it doesn't mean that it's the only way of doing things. Language variation allows better opportunity for change, and it is very inclusive, which eliminates the need for judgment and allows for room for understanding one another. So next, we have status. Whether real or perceived, both drives and reflects variation of many kinds, whether at the levels of lexis, dialect, or discourse. So, one of the major topics of the chapter is how language variation is highly dependent upon the social factors that determine our identities, hence why social linguistics is one of our key vocabulary terms. So this quote focuses on how class creates a shift in language. More than class has a effect on our language. But this is one of the things that kind of stood out for me. So typically, those considered to be upper class speak with a form of language that closely aligns with standard American English, compared to those from lower class who tend to stray away from formal English, especially when most of the people in lower class tend to align with different types of culture. So they kind of embody a form of their culture inside of their variation of English. Next, we have it is argued that language develops just as a plant grows. You can see the growth, but the growth is continuous, and it would be difficult to say that one stage of growth begins and another ends there. So language is forever changing. We can see it clearly now, especially with the use of social media sites like Twitter and the creation of the 140 characters or less. All right, it taught people that you don't need all of these words to express how you feel. And then also, even with emojis and how emojis kind of represent certain words or phrases that we use all the time. A simple emoji can tell somebody that you are dying laughing inside, okay? And so language has evolved for as long as anybody can remember it, and it will continue to evolve and grow and change for as long as the entire existence of the world. Next, we have highly dense and multiplex social networks seem to maintain or help maintain vernacular dialects. So this is kind of piggybacking off of social network theory. Um, During the vocabulary portion, this encompasses the idea of how we interact in the social world impacts the way we speak and help to maintain a level of dialect. So if you become friends with one person and then you have all of these friends that you bring together and now you all created this community of people, eventually the way you speak with this community of people, especially if you're spending most of your time together, like whether you are, you know, all of you have the same kids, well, have kids in the same school, you're doing play dates together, and you're hanging out with these people so much, this group kind of impacts the way you speak or what you say and all of these other pieces that kind of make up your dialect. And it's almost the same way as how a geographic location or community can kind of build your language. It's the same thing. Your social networks have a major impact on how and what you say each day. Lastly, we have code switching is often the unmarked or expected form of communication in some communities and contexts rather than the exceptional occurrence. Code switching often goes unnoticed, yet at this point it's not anything surprising. Socially, we have all slowly adapted to code switching, and as teachers, we do it especially in the classroom every single day, whether we're going from teaching a whole class to a small group or teaching a single student, and even more from when we go teaching and to maintaining a casual conversation at home with our families. Um, and I think it's just this known thing now where we're expecting it to happen. I don't expect my colleagues to talk to me the same way that they talk to their children. And that's kind of what this whole idea of code switching is all about, especially as it relates to the whole chapter of we vary in how we speak or who we speak to. So, practical classroom usage. We'll now look at some of the ways that language variation can be used in our classroom. So, student background. Like I said earlier, we all have social aspects in our lives that kind of build us who we are, and our identities impact what our language is. So, understanding the variety of backgrounds in the classroom helps you to create assignments that all your students can connect to. So, for the school that I teach at, historically has been mostly African American students. However, lately we've been getting an influx of Hispanic students. So, one thing that I've changed in my curriculum this year, upcoming, is that now I've included a novel study that is from a Hispanic author. I have a lot of Spanish speaking students, so I want to give them something that they can relate to in the classroom, and that's The House on Mango Street. And there's a lot of embedded Spanish culture in that book, and it's something that my students can be appreciative of a curriculum that looks and feels like them. Now we have code switching. It's allowing students to use variation of the language in personal assignments that can help them to get acclimated to writing. And this is especially with my journals in my classroom. Each day the kids come in, they journal for the first 10 minutes of classrooms, and there is no guidelines or restrictions as long as they answer what the question is or they respond to the prompt. I don't care what form of language they use as long as they are answering my questions and it's comprehensible. As long as I can understand what your writing is, I do not care, because I want you to get comfortable with the idea of writing rather than how to write properly, because they're sixth graders, they're not adults. They have a long way to go. We next have variation, and that is embracing language variation in the context of time and place allows for students to feel more comfortable in the overall learning environment. Um, of course, this is like one of those things where when we're having classroom discussions, whatever way you need to speak to get your thoughts out and help me understand what you're trying to say, I don't care. If you need to use AAVE, if you need to use whatever it is, as long as I can understand you, it's cool. However, when it comes to writing a formal essay, I do want you to get as close to the standard American English as you possibly can, so that it's a formal assessment. And most times, those formal assessments go to people above my head anyway. And that leads us to SAE. So I spend less time focusing on standard American English in classroom to allow students an opportunity to focus on comprehension and analytical skills. One of the things that we teach a lot in my school is that the milestones is not going to judge you harshly on grammar and spelling. What they want you to do is be able to comprehend what you're reading and analyze what you're reading and to write about it. All right. So I focus on my students learning the skill before they learn the grammar and everything else. While it is important and we do spend time on it, I care about, can you answer my question first, and then going back to fix how you sounded when you answered my question in the beginning. And then last, we have a chapter summary. Okay, so overall, language variation can be discussed in a variety of different contexts. Language variation can be broken up to examine the sounds we make, the words we use, our backgrounds and identity, and how they shape our language, and how we structurally change language in a social context. Understanding and studying variation has the potential to help us understand and communicate with one another. We are all entitled to speak in language and use language in whatever ways that we need to. Um, the communities we are part of, both physically and socially, help to mold the language we speak. Our social networks or our social worlds have a major impact on language, whether it be the geographic locations or anything else. To piggyback off the conversation about the dialect from earlier, my being from Alabama had an impact on my language forms, but so does my being an African American, which leads to our next point, that most levels of change with language happen even when we don't realize it. Sometimes we don't even notice the variations of our own language, especially when we are code switching. And that pretty much sums up everything. Here is a list of references used in the creation of this presentation, which was the textbook How English Works, more specifically chapter 11. Thank you for tuning in on this presentation. I hope that I gave you a little bit more insight on language variation and learned just something new today. So I hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you and bye.